I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. Did you know that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar loves comic books and that Tom Hanks collects vintage typewriters? I once talked to the governor of one of our 50 states who waxed poetic about shoeing horses. Every single one of us has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights us up. On this show, I sit down with fascinating people and we talk about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. It might be surprising, it might be funny, it might be deep. It's what I really want to talk about. Today we're talking with Dr. Jacob Dickerson. He's an assistant professor of communication and the chair of the communication department here at Berea College. He earned his Ph.D. in communication, rhetoric, and digital media at North Carolina State University. One of his current research interests examines the idea of memory ecology, which is made up of the collection of many remembrances of a particular event. He also is working on a project that involves the study of popular music and art, taking a critical perspective toward the dismissal of recent pop music. A self-proclaimed member of the Gap generation, which I don't even know what that means, born somewhere between 1978 and 1983. I assume you know where you were born in that 5-year span. Dr. Dickerson grew up in Western New York, which is not upstate New York. He's a husband and a dad, and crucially, believes that Back to the Future is the greatest movie of all time. Jacob Dickerson, welcome. What do you really want to talk about today?
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here, and I think that what I really want to talk about, MonsterVision.
What
right?
What is MonsterVision? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so MonsterVision was a movie anthology show, hosted movie marathon anthology in the 1990s on TNT. It aired most Saturdays, some Fridays as well, and they would show for a long time it was sort of old B monster sci-fi movies, and then later, starting in 1996, a dude named Joe Bob Briggs started to host it, and he played mostly slasher films, and things like that.
So this was in the 90s. I'm assuming this was late at night.
Well, it would run all night. It would start usually around 8, sometimes not till 10.
Okay.
And then it would run until 5, 6 in the morning.
And why did this show mean so much to you?
It was just something that always, fascinated me. I didn't watch tons of it live, but I was always aware of it. I was always, when I got to watch it, was always excited. Mm-hmm. And the movies they would show just were always kind of in my wheelhouse that I was excited about and watching.
So how old would you have been when you first sort of got into this?
Well, it started in 1991.
Okay. You were a kid.
And so I was a kid. Yeah, I was 10 when it began airing.
Okay.
Probably, 10 or 11 when I became aware of it and would watch it when I could. And it ran through 2000, I believe.
So there were precursors to this, I think. So before there was cable, I'm a little bit older than you, but before there was cable, there were things. A lot of local TV stations would have a similar sort of movie night. And there were some famous ones, like, I don't know if you know Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, stuff like that.
Yes.
She would host a similar kind of movie show, right? And she was a very popular Halloween costume for many years. But so you said this was in your wheelhouse. So kind of, and I have just a general question about this. So the movies I remember that I think would have been shown on this are things like, for my generation, even before my generation, people would remember things like Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like, that's a famous sort of touchstone of this kind of movie, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And those would definitely be the kind of movies that were shown, especially early on.
Right.
Because those would have been really cheap for a cable network to rent.
And a lot of those movies are, I think, considered, you said B movies. Another word might be campy.
Yes.
or schlocky even, like not the highest quality films, although some of them might have been. So what was a typical sort of lineup on that show?
So let's see. You would have, sometimes they'd have special nights. They'd have a Dracula night, for instance.
Okay.
And so you'd watch Dracula from the 30s, and then you'd watch Return of Dracula. And then you'd watch, which Return of Dracula was really interesting. It actually took place, in modern day, and, which was interesting. And then you might watch something more generic like The Vampire or Return of the Vampire.
Right.
And so they'd show all, 4 of those movies
Right.
in a single
one night.
back to back.
Yeah. So you'd stay up all night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then other times it would be a little bit more random. You'd get kind of like those Hammer films like The Reptile or Gorgo, or kind of these random monsters that they just sort of invented.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think people hear two sort of titles for this kind of movie. You hear a monster movie, right? Or you might hear a horror movie. Is there a difference? What's the difference between a monster movie and a horror movie, or is there?
Well, there is a difference because not all horror movies are monster movies, but I think most monster movies would be classified as horror, at least older style. I don't think that you would call your new Godzilla movies horror movies by any stretch. They're more action films compared to the 1940s or 50s when the first, say, Godzilla movies come out. I think you might consider those more horror. But then, so that's kind of your main monsters, your Godzillas, your King Kongs, your also, if we're looking at Universal, your Draculas, your Wolfmen, Frankensteins, and those are sort of monster movies where there's this identifiable threat to large swaths of a community or humanity or something like that, versus something that's a lot more localized, I guess. So something like The Reptile, while the villain in that is a woman who turns into a ridiculous looking lizard thing in the English countryside, she's a monster, right? She's monstrous.
Yeah.
But she's also more locally focused.
So she's not, she's not going to destroy an entire city.
Exactly.
Maybe just her neighborhood. Or right. Okay, so a horror movie, like, say, for instance, the horror movies people might be most familiar with, like Friday the 13th, or the Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street. Is that what they were called?
Yeah.
That's like one really bad. They're monstrous, but they're kind of human, and they're just threatening sort of individual people in a specific
small groups
place, a setting like the camp, or like Jason was always at a summer camp. That's my memory of that.
That is correct. Yeah, and so stuff like that, those would be slasher films.
Okay, there's another word. Yeah,
that are kind of created in the 70s. Yeah, popularized in the 80s, and probably 3/4 of the second half of MonsterVision's run was slasher films.
Yeah. So that's like a killer, sort of
a humanistic, a primarily human, maybe supernatural in some way.
Yeah.
Killer going around with a machete.
I remember you telling me before we've had this conversation that you were sort of on a quest to watch all the movies that were ever shown on MonsterVision. Yes. So I guess the question is why? Like, what is it about you or about these films that you sort of feel like, that's you need to do that? What is that?
So I'm a completist. And it's probably some sort of psychological issue.
Some kind of mania.
Yeah. But so, for example, Star Trek. Yeah. Hundreds of hours of Star Trek is out there if you put in all the shows, all the movies, all that. And so one day a few years ago, I said, I'm going to watch some Star Trek. And 5 years later, I finally finished watching Star Trek. And this was during COVID, actually.
Okay.
My wife and I got to talking about MonsterVision.
Okay.
And how much we enjoyed Joe Bob Briggs. And
he was the host.
He was the host
Okay.
During the slasher era.
Okay.
And we were talking about that, and I said, I wonder if there's a list of movies somewhere. And sure enough, I found one.
Yep.
Organized by the date in which they aired.
Thanks to the internet.
Right, exactly. And so I decided I scrolled through it real fast. And I said, I don't know, maybe there's about 200 movies, 300 movies here. And so I said, I'm going to go ahead and start watching them. And so now here we are 4 years later. I'm 150 movies in. Some of them I had seen before, of course. Some were brand new to me. Most of them can be hard to find.
Sure.
Going to sketchy websites.
Right.
Things like that. But actually, after our conversation, I decided I've never gone to see how many movies there actually are.
Yeah.
I began to realize that it was way more than 200 or 300.
A lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so after our conversation, I put them into a spreadsheet and found out that there were 1,363 movies shown, including repeats. And so I went through and removed all the repeats, and there's around 650 some movies. So it's not as bad as I had feared.
Yeah.
But
well, but you're a busy guy, right? I mean, you've got a demanding job and a demanding career. You have a family. Do you sort of carve out MonsterVision time every week? how are you planning to get through all of these? I mean, I'm thinking that's 3,000 hours of movies, right?
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So I'm not going to watch any of them twice.
Good call.
If I've seen them before, I'll watch them again.
Okay.
But I won't watch it again as part of
because this is like a discrete marathon project now. So even if you've watched it before, now you're on this.
I have to watch it as part of this.
It's in your spreadsheet, so you have to watch it.
That's right. But if the same movie shows up on the list twice, I'm only going to watch it once.
So as you're watching, and we don't have a lot of time here, but I want to talk about maybe a couple of specific movies. But do you do any notation? Do you sort of write about it or think about it or say, oh, that one was particularly good, or I like this one, or this one was terrible? Like, how do you do that?
I do.
Yeah, I figured.
Because otherwise, why
do
I bother?
Right.
I want to be able to look back and say, here's what I've accomplished. And so to answer your previous question, I watch them by myself at night on my phone. Okay. So in
on
bed,
your phone. Interesting.
In bed, my wife's asleep.
And that poor woman.
Right. And I told her the other day that I had discovered that there were 650 movies or whatever, and she just shook her head and said, "I'm glad I'm not you." Does she like this genre? Does she like these B movies? She does. Yeah,
or at least tolerates them. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. She does like them.
Yeah.
But she's not going to seek them out.
No.
Like she'll tune in and watch. But
right. So 1,600 movies all on a spreadsheet, and maybe you'll make a little notation.
Right. Yeah. So I rate them between 1 and 5. Well, 0 and 5.
Okay.
Because I've got some 0.5s in there.
Yeah.
And then if there are notes such as, maybe it was the same actor. So like the Hammer films, there were 2 or 3 actors that just appeared in.
What are the Hammer films? What's that?
So Hammer Productions was a British horror film company that came about in the 50s, I guess, and they were famous for. They were really famous for a lot of the Dracula films.
Okay.
Starring Christopher Lee.
Oh, yeah.
They made 10 of them or something like that. But then they also did a bunch of mummy films.
Okay.
The Reptile that I mentioned was one. And I've mentioned that a lot because that's actually the very first MonsterVision movie. That was a Hammer film. Other random vampire movies. So just kind of these...
Okay.
Schlocky movies.
It was like a studio that made these kinds of movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you're how many movies in?
150.
150. So you still got a long way to go.
I do.
Okay. I feel a book here or something or a website or I don't know.
I've thought about a podcast.
Well, there you go.
But now
Well, you're
Like
starting today, so
But it's been 4 years now since I've watched The Reptile, and so my choice is either don't remember it very well.
you.
Yeah.
So tell me about like you're 200 movies in. You probably watched them too a long time ago, right? Some of them.
Some of them,
And
yeah.
but now you're on this quest to watch all of them.
Correct.
Okay. So give us one that's really in your book highly rated, and sort of why.
Okay. So probably one that surprised me, and it was one that I had not seen before.
Yeah.
This was, and it's actually not a horror film, but it's probably a fairly early example of post-apocalyptic
Okay.
cinema.
Yep.
And it's called.
You need your spreadsheet.
I need my spreadsheet. Let me pull open my spreadsheet. The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. That's the name of it.
The World, the Flesh, and the Devil.
World, the Flesh,
Okay,
and the
so this
Devil.
in
I didn't
in
even
your
find it. It just came
in
to
your and let's just sort of stipulate that perhaps now you are the world's foremost authority on these movies, right? Or at least one
I
of them.
probably wouldn't go
certainly.
that far.
Well, how many other people are going to watch all 1,600?
Very few.
That's a small club.
It
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
So The World, the Flesh, and the Devil stars Harry Belafonte.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Wow.
Right? And so he is a miner,
Okay.
and he's trapped in the mine, and nobody comes to help him. And he's like, why did nobody come to help me? Well, and eventually he escapes. He gets himself out. And I say eventually, this is like 5 minutes of film time.
All right.
And so he gets himself out, and everyone's gone.
Oh, my gosh.
And what's really interesting is there are no bodies,
Oh,
right? So
There's
you know,
just
millions
an empty
of people
world.
have died. It's just an empty world. And I imagine that probably had to do with budget and censor
Yeah.
constraints and things. And so he comes up and he starts walking, and eventually gets to New York City,
yeah.
where he meets a woman who appears to be the sole survivor in New York City. And then eventually another dude comes and shows up.
Yeah.
And so you've got these two men, one of them black
Okay.
and one woman
Okay.
who's also white. And they kind of, develop this sort of triangle relationship.
Yeah.
And tensions rise, and
Sure.
eventually there's some violence
Okay.
and things. And it was a movie I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And it fascinated me
Yeah.
from start to finish.
Well, and now there's that's a genre now, like the
right.
the sort of like virus movies or zombie movies,
Exactly.
or Everyone's Gone. There was the HBO series The Leftovers. I bet
Yes.
you watched that, where like 2% of the world just disappeared in one day. Nobody knew why or how. So those are things. So what is it? We don't have a lot of time here, but let's talk about this in a larger context. So why do horror movies continue to be so popular? That they're in the theaters now. I mean,
Sure.
I've seen a million lately. There seems to be a lot that have come out very recently. Killer Nuns seems to be a thing.
Nuns and Clowns.
Nuns and Clowns, yeah. So what is it about our culture that makes us want to look at these kinds of movies?
Because they really give us an opportunity to explore cultural fears in a safe way. And, other genres can do that as well. Sci-fi does that. But horror doesn't just explore the fear. It tells us it's okay to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
And helps us process it.
Okay.
One of, I think, the most interesting sort of analyses of a horror film I've seen, I think, illustrates this a little bit. And that is, it's an analysis of the Blair Witch Project.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, from 1999. And it's talking about the loss of innocence and the fear of sort of adulthood.
Yeah.
And there's that psychological fear for us individually as a culture.
Right.
But then we also, particularly at that time, we're looking at 1999, getting ready for 2000. and there's sort of a fear of how is our country evolving? How, what's going to be happening
Right.
as we move into the new millennium and all of this at that time. And so kind of the growing up, the maturing of America, if you will. And so that interplay between our individual fears and this larger cultural fear comes to play as we see them act. We see the main characters of the movie, the only characters of the movie, kind of having fun, really innocent. They don't really believe in the legend and all of this at the beginning. And then as they go, they become increasingly kind of fraught, of course. And then at the very end, and I don't know if you've seen the film.
It's been many years. Yeah, I saw it.
And so at the end, they go into the house.
Yeah.
And they're going through, and there's the scene where she's going up the stairs. Heather's going up the stairs. And on the wall, there's handprints, like children's handprints.
Yes. Yeah.
And how that sort of represents now she's in this moment of fear.
Right.
And eventually she's in the basement, and we see her friend, we see Mike standing in the corner. And so now they're back in childhood, and fear has
just
consumed them and removed sort of all of their adult concerns and everything.
Yeah.
Obviously, very negatively for them.
Although I do recall, I'm glad you brought that movie up, because I do recall watching that movie, seeing it in the theater actually, and it's one of the very few movies I can say I was legitimately frightened, disturbed, and part of it was the way they filmed it. You know, it was very
that had never been done.
No, never. It was very innovative.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really glad we had this conversation, because I even forgot that it's Halloween this week, and so this is the perfect perfect time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've seen the movie, because I actually saw it in the theater at the time in 1999.
Yeah,
and then I saw it in the theater again over this past summer. They did a 25th anniversary re-release or whatever, and so I went to see it again, and it's a movie that I think has to be seen in the theater to be fully appreciated.
Yeah,
because I feel like the last 10 minutes of that movie, as long as you're invested in it,
it's very intense.
It's
some
of the maybe the scariest 10 minutes of movie that I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for being here today and telling us what you really want to talk about. That's what this is all about.
I'm sorry we're out of time.
No, me too, but it's okay. We can. You've got more. You can come back. We'll talk more about it. What I really want to talk about is recorded, edited, and produced in the Media Production Lab on the campus of Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. Many thanks to our guest this week, Dr. Jacob Dickerson, in the Communications Department here at Berea College. I'm Tim Monroe, and I'll be back next time to find out what another fascinating person really wants to talk about.